family is very outdoorsy, and every year we go to what we call hunting camp. This involves my brother, dad, myself, and close family friends, usually about 15 guys. We've been going to the same woods that my father and his dad went to over 30 years ago, and even camp in the same spot in Michigan. This is a spot tucked deep into the woods and is by no means a sanctioned campground. This area we camp by almost borders right up to the Native American land given to the tribes by the state. Now, I've read enough of these stories, and I'm generally pretty skeptical of the more far-fetched ones, but those who know the area can verify this, or you can Google it. For our camp, we set up a huge old canvas army tent that sleeps about 15 guys in cots. My brother and I stopped sleeping in that tent and would set up our own individual tents, because amongst the other guys, there is one that is an unbelievably loud sleeper. Seriously, you wouldn't even believe me if I could mimic for you. This particular night happened 4 to 5 years ago, and it's the reason I rejoined the group in the larger tent. Totally worth listening to the snoring to not experience this again. So generally, our days go as follows. Hunt in the morning, come back for lunch, go back out for the afternoon hunt, then at night, eat dinner and get super wasted. We're up pretty late doing this, and when people get too drunk or tired, they peel off from the group and go to sleep. On this night, probably about 1 a.m., there's a few of us left by the fire, and we finally decide to call it quits for the night. I'm a notoriously light sleeper, and it's difficult for me to even fall asleep. As I laid there trying my best to drift off and ignore the unexplainable noises you hear in the woods late at night, I heard one that simply cannot be ignored, and my heart begins to race. Off in the distance into the woods, a crunching noise grew louder and louder. It sounded just like footsteps, a crunch, crunch, crunch sound as it stepped on the fall leaves and twigs. Now, I'm not inexperienced when it comes to noises in the woods. I've done enough hunting and camping to know the sound of small critters running around or leaves and sticks falling. This was clearly the noise of footsteps walking through the woods, and on this night there was no wind, just this crunching noise that sounded like it was coming right towards me. It got much louder and clearer until it sounded like it was right outside my tent. It just stopped, and I could hear nothing else. At this point, I was panicking, and I had a few options. I screamed for help, at the risk of it being nothing and looking like a huge weenie. Once everyone wakes up, I lay there and try to ignore and sleep. I go out there and see for myself. I chose option 3. I quickly jumped out of my bag and scrambled to get out to the tent, ready to take on whatever might be waiting for me. But by the time I was out, there was nothing. I stood just outside my tent, with my flashlight looking through the dark forest, trying to spot anything that could have been the cause of the noise, but couldn't find a thing. Unhappily, I was forced to go back in and try and sleep, not knowing what was out there. Now, the really creepy part was the next morning. My dad asked a buddy, Jim, what he was doing by the fire last night by himself. Jim said that he was never out there and was in the tent the whole night. My dad explained that he got up in the middle of the night, take a piss. Lots of drinking will do that to you. And Jim was just sitting by the fire alone. When he asked him what he was doing, he just continued to stare into the fire and said nothing. My dad didn't think too much of it and just went back to bed. That's when I told them what happened to me, but there wasn't really anything we could do to explain any of it. So we brushed it off. This is exactly how the events happened, with no exaggeration. Neither my dad nor Jim had any reason to make any of it up, and I absolutely believe them. Obviously, Goten or Wendigos come to mind, especially because of the proximity to the Indian land, but I'm not a superstitious person. I can't be otherwise. I would never go into those woods again. We still camp in that very same spot every year, but like I said, it's with everyone else in the big tent. We've had a few other occurrences that were weird, but we definitely think those involved actual people, more than likely the Native Americans. About 7 years ago, I was on a backpacking trip with 3 friends, one a ranger, the rest of us botany nerds, and all 4 of us saw something we still cannot explain. Day 1 went off without a hitch. It was a bit long, and a lot of elevation gain, but nonetheless, we set up camp and heated beans and rice under what was one of the clearest summer skies I can remember. This is up in WA, and the night sky from the mountains is just unreal. Day 2 was different. All 4 of us awoke shortly before dusk to a shrill scream. Not super uncommon. Most of us are pretty seasoned hikers, campers, backpackers. The sound of something getting killed is pretty universal. None of us could quite make it out. If I remember correctly, we assumed it was a coyote, that familiar yelp wail. Anyways, it was pretty close, which is probably why it woke us all up. So we started scoping out a small radius around the campsite. We found what looked like somebody had put a bomb in some kind of animal. No evidence of an actual explosive. I'm just trying to give you the same picture I have in my head. A totally indecipherable heap of flesh and fur, probably about the size of a German Shepherd, similar fur coloration too. We discussed how odd it was for a bit, then decided more or less, "Hey, what are you gonna do?" and moved on. Best explanation was something tore into it and bailed, maybe by the sound of us waking up. Day 3. Did you see that? We're winding down from a fairly short day of hiking. Tired from the past 2 days, I remember us joking about being old farts now and not being able to hustle like we could a few years prior. The sun was just making its way down over the tree line while we busted out the whiskey and started boiling a pot of water for more beans, rice. I'll never forget this moment as long as I live. One of a crew was just launching into a story about his ex, and it went something like this. Yeah, so she was just about the worst possible kind of, he gets cut off by a loud pop, which we all unanimously recognized / described as a tree's last leg snapping before it falls. We're all standing now, scanning the tree line. We're in a small clearing, aside from the single large tree we're next to. A few minutes go by without a sound, nothing. Then we start hearing the forest's life make noise again, mostly birds doing their thing. We all settle back in, presuming the tree wound up leaning up against another tree instead of hitting the forest floor. It sounds pretty close, but there aren't too many trees we need to be concerned about, i.e. couldn't reach us if it fell in the middle of the night. Then another wail, like the one we heard on the first night, except more distant. Though I never sense it, one of the crew says, sounded like it came from a cave, like it echoed. So we go looking for a cave in that general direction. We search for about 45 minutes before one of us suggests we just head back, as we are going to be out of sunlight soon. More importantly, it's starting to get dark, and we're a little ways from the safety of our tents. We never find anything like a cave or something that would cause that kind of reverb or any kind of body. Heading back towards the clearing / our campsite from the woods, something catches a friend's eye. "Did you see that?" He's pointing across the clearing about 9 o'clock. We're taking a direct path, so our campsite is dead ahead at 12. We're all looking in that direction, scanning the tree line. "Where?" "What?" "Dude, I'm telling you, there was a person right there, just beyond camp." He's visibly shaken by it, and it's pretty obvious he isn't fooling around or thought he could be mistaken. We're nowhere near a road or town, and even the nearest trail is miles away. A handful of times, I've run into other backpackers in a similar way, people checking out your camp / heading the direction of your fire. So the rest of us had a pretty open, let's go check it out mentality. But the friend who saw the figure suggests we all take a knee and wait while we hide in the tree line's cover. So there we are, kneeling in the brush, staring at our own campsite from the other side of the clearing, when we all unanimously see a figure start to move against the brush from 9 to 8, 7, counterclockwise. Since we're at effectively 6 o'clock, this becomes increasingly unsettling. I remember noting our ranger buddy readying his rifle and another friend putting a hand on his knife. We're all feeling the same uneasiness now. I say we saw a figure, but really we could just hear and occasionally see the brush moving in that area. Ranger buddy declares it just has to be a bear. The original spotter whispering his argument about it standing like a person. Either way, we decide getting into the clearing and making our presence known was the best choice. We either need to scare off the bear or confront this person. So we all stand up and jog into the clearing, shouting, "Hey bear." This is more or less standard procedure, in case you're wondering. Nothing happens. Nothing at all. Now, we're all standing in the middle of the clearing, somewhere about halfway between our 6 o'clock position and our camp, just waiting for something to happen. We're about 20 minutes away from total darkness when there's another wail from 4 o'clock, but our focus is towards 7. I whirl around before realizing one of us was already looking that way, and his face is totally pale. Then I see it too. We all do. There's the silhouette of a tall man leaning over something else, facing away from us, and then he clearly rests on one knee before turning to look our way. Our ranger buddy has his rifle in air. "Hey, who the heck is over?" He's about to lay into him for hunting when the figure comes to a full stand, hard to gauge, probably about 6 foot, and then takes off away from us. And I don't mean like a man scrambling to run away or a bear bounding off into the brush. This is more like Usain Bolt if he were born and raised in the mountains. Never in my life have I ever seen anything like it, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit it, my first reaction was ghost. After a pretty long wait and arguing over what it was, what to do, we swing back to camp to grab a few flashlights and our lamp. We make our way over to where the figure was leaning, and it's another mound of flesh. Without getting too detailed, this time some unmistakable fox paws are intermixed. Again, it looks like it was exploded open, and the meat eaten on the spot, not harvested like a hunter. You probably wouldn't be surprised to hear we don't sleep much that night. We make jokes about encountering Sasquatch out there. I've never been a spiritual man, still not. But it's very difficult to shake the inhuman yet human, supernatural nature of the way it looked and moved. None of us could make out any kind of clothing that would break up its silhouette. Not to mention, I've never personally seen something kill quite like that. The closest thing I've ever seen is a deer carcass post-bear in a time of year that would have made it very hungry, aggressive, closer to hibernation, which wouldn't have been during our summer hike. What gets me is we heard the same shrill wails 3 times, and the distance between our day 2 site and our day 3 site was close to 10 miles, meaning we were on the same general game trail as it was, or it was following us. My family used to camp in Algonquin Park in Ontario when I was a kid. We used to do a lot of the day hikes with our dog. The dog was a crazy runner and would run up and down the trail, back and forth between my parents and my brother and me. This one trail ended at a lookout. My brother and I stopped to take in the view, and my dog arrived. Seconds later, traveling at full speed. He attempted to apply the brakes, but the momentum carried him right over the edge. We freaked out. Our dog had just gone over a cliff, and it was a good 50 or 60-foot drop. I ventured over to the edge to look. My dog had somehow landed on the one ledge that sat about 10 feet down. Crap. Now what? Any movement, and my dog would fall the rest of the way down. It was a sheer face, and no way to get down. Out of the blue, from the trail behind, appears a hiker with full hiking gear. Algonquin is not an area known for a lot of climbing, and I've never seen anyone before or since with gear on that trail. This guy belayed down, rescued my dog, packed up, and left. He didn't even stick around long enough to get his name. To all intents and purposes, he just returned to the trail and vanished. Not a camper or ranger, but an archaeologist. A few years back, we were doing a massive survey in the middle of nowhere in the interior of British Columbia. All the crew had gone home, and it was just my boss and myself left for a few days to follow up and confirm some coordinates and finish some mapping. We head out from the motel an hour or so into the bush, in the middle of nowhere, along deactivated logging roads. The closest town is miles and miles away. We hike out to this one area we had found a few weeks previously. For some reason, the whole area just felt off. So we get down to business, and about 15 minutes after being hunched over mapping, there is this weird, deafening whomp sound, like I could feel pressure in my ears. I immediately looked at my boss about 20 feet away, and he is white as a ghost staring back at me. While standing there, it happens again. Whomp, ear pressure and chest pressure, like I was just squeezed. Chills erupt all over my body, and every hair is standing on end. My boss just looks at me and says, "Let's go." We grab all of our stuff and speed hike back to the truck. We never discussed it. No clue what it was, but I have never been so freaked out in my life. 10 years later, I still get the chills. Edit. There have been a lot of theories and sounds, but nothing like it. The best I can describe. You know when a large bird or an eagle takes flight? That initial whoosh whomp sounds of the wings pumping in the air. Kind of like that, but you would feel it, and it was loud. I have seen weird lights, heard weird sounds, found weird stuff in the woods before, but the one that sticks out was years ago. I was camping at a friend's property in South Texas. While asleep in my tent, I suddenly wake up in the middle of the night. One of those from dead sleep to wide awake in a half-second things. I can feel something is outside the tent, but I don't want to look. I have considerable camping, hiking experience, so I am not freaking out too much. I very slowly unzip the top of the tent door, being as quiet as I can, and look out of the tent. There is scarce light because we were camped under a giant oak tree, So big, the branches dip down, connect the ground before growing back up again. It is a huge tree, and there are a lot of shadows and weird shapes. Anyway, as my eyes start to adjust, I realize there are about 40 plus coyotes all milling around the campsite, just slowly walking around, sniffing here and there, almost ghost-like in their quietness. I slowly zipped the flap back up and laid there for about 30 minutes before I fell back to sleep. In the morning, in the light, you couldn't tell anything had been there. The next night, we heard the pack howling for hours in the distance. That was almost freakier than seeing them 10 feet away. This happened about 8 years ago when I was 21 and working as a camp counselor for Camp Tommy in Fishkill, New York. The place is basically a bunch of cabins in the woods on top of a mountain, each cabin a half-mile apart from the other, so you're pretty isolated in the woods. One night, at about 1 a.m., I was sneaking off to meet my camp GF. You're supposed to stay in your cabins after 10 p.m., as was usual, and was cutting through some woods to get her to cabin. Suddenly, I heard rustling in the woods and stopped to investigate it. There are bears/other animals, so I was expecting something like that. This 3-foot-tall humanoid type thing suddenly jumps out of the bushes and looks at me. It's too dark for me to make out any of its features, other than it was standing on 2 feet, had 2 arms, and basically looked just like a miniature person without any features, just looked solid black. If it had clothes on, I would have been able to notice that. I was curious what it was, so I started walking towards it, and it spooked, bolting back into the woods. I'll never forget how mechanical it looked as it took off running. Its whole body basically shifted 90 degrees, like if someone was doing the robot dance, and it just took off. I have never seen anything on 2 legs run that quickly, so I was pretty confused about what it was. I'm a pretty fast runner and fit person in general, but this thing was on another level of fast. As much as I try to make sense of it, I still to this day have no idea what it was. It was very human, but too short to be a human. 3 feet tall is about accurate. And I don't know how a human could run that fast anyway. I have no idea, but it's always bugged me. Maybe one day I will go back to try and find this creature again. We were camping around a different area of the US, hitting 13 states. It wasn't a trip with a firm itinerary, and we drove through Amish country in Indiana despairing that we wouldn't find a campground as it was late in the day. But in the middle of Amish country, we found a lovely campground with a nice big pond for swimming. We were the weirdos who do tent camping, and you had to drive down past this field to the tent camping area. There was a nice forested area, and we had it to ourselves. Here comes the really odd part. There was another occupied campsite down there, but it looked like the people had been beamed up by aliens. Food was left out, bottles of mustard, mayo and plates were on and around the picnic table. The one tent was blown over, but the other was still firmly staked. We mentioned this to the campsite staff. They said, "Oh, that is the so-and-so spot." He was supposed to be a look after all the tent spots. They had no idea that he wasn't there. We wondered if someone was dead in the tents, so we cautiously checked. No dead bodies, just sleeping bags, etc. So aliens. My scout troop was on a 10-day backpacking trek at Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. We were hiking in the southern region and must have been on night 4 or 5. We got to the campsite after a surprise thunderstorm that dumped about 2 inches of hail on us. We set up camp and built a fire to dry out our clothes. While sitting around the campfire, someone noticed that a tent stake bag was hanging on a nearby branch of a tree, about 5 feet off the ground. It was swinging back and forth, hard enough that the branch was moving, though no wind was blowing. We stopped it from swinging and watched it to see if it would start up again, and it did. It took it a few minutes to get going again, but it was swinging on its own in the same direction. We all went to sleep for the night, only to find it in the morning still swinging. We have no idea what would have caused this. I was a park ranger on a small island, the only year-round resident. Private boat access only with no bridge or ferries. It became crowded in summer, but we'd empty out completely when the weather turned. I loved the off-season, with 400 acres all to myself. No phone, no internet. Sometimes, though, I would get bored. I'd go out at night without a flashlight and challenge myself to hike the entire island in the dark. There was moonlight to navigate by, but there was also a stretch of the main trail that passed through the oldest trees on the island where I'd be plunged into total darkness. I was in the old forest one night when I heard something behind me. I turned, nothing there. Turned back and something brushed my face. My stomach dropped and I swung my fist into something. I ran full tilt for 100 yards, stomping in my big stupid boots with my gun belt bouncing up and down, my vest riding up to sore my throat. I stopped and bent over with a stitch in my side and started laughing. I held my hand in front of my eyes and ran my fingers over the prickled cut from the branch I'd punched. Through the spread fingers of my injured hand, I saw a smear of bright white off-trail ahead. I figured it was one of a small herd of white-rumped deer the locals wrongfully referred to as palominos, but it moved up a side trail before I could get a better look. I got my breath under control and followed. 100 feet up the side trail, it split again, and I could hear something moving through the underbrush, just past the fork and to the right. I crouched as I made my way to the fork and stayed low, trying to keep quiet and unseen. The trail gains elevation as it nears the center of the island, where the trees spread out and the moon lights things up. I heard a sharp bark and froze, then crept forwards a few feet. I reached the fork and was straining to see ahead when I heard the crunch and crack of something in the brush behind me. I spun and saw a pale man, 6 foot or taller, with dark hair, wearing a bright white t-shirt, about 30 feet from me. He gave me a lunatic grin, barked again, a hard sharp ha, then turned and ran off into the woods. I stood still, scanning the trees, my hand on my gun. After not hearing anything for a few moments, I backtracked my way to the main trail, and terrified, speed walked all the way back to my cabin. Hiked the exterior again that night, with a flashlight this time, and checked the coast for evidence of any visitor, boater, or wayward traveler. Nothing. I got up early morning, and in the light of day, I did the same with the same result. I don't know who or what it could have been. The way he was running around off-trail convinced me that he knew the island very well, better than me, for sure, and that he was hiding out somewhere, but I never found any evidence of the secret lair, and I never saw him again. I used to work as a ranger at Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. If you don't know what it is, think summer camp combined with a backpacking trek. There's a place on the ranch called Uraca Mesa, and there's all sorts of local legends, probably also exaggerated by the staff, about it being haunted, a portal to the underworld, Anasazi burial ground, etc. If you look at a topographical map, the mesa looks like a profile shot of a human skull. So there's that. Anyway, one of the stories about the mesa is that at night you can see weird lights coming from the top. I've been there for 4 summers and even camped on top of the mesa and had never seen it until one night. A scout troop and I were camped on the backside of the mesa. It's a little after sunset, and we're all sitting around shooting the breeze. I hadn't told them any of the haunted stories at this point, when one of the kids points up to the mesa and asks, "What's that?" I figure he's seeing some flashlights coming down the trail from the mesa, because I know there's supposed to be another group camping with us. So I tell him. He says that it doesn't look like flashlights to him, so I turn around and he's right. The lights weren't coming from where the trail is. They're off the right, and it's not a flashlight. It's like the light is coming from behind the mesa or from a fire that you can't see. Only it's not orange-red like firelight. It's blue. Creepiest thing ever, because if the blue lights are real, what else is real? At this point though, I'm still thinking it's that other group, but like 15 minutes later, they roll into camp and we can still see the lights. Did not sleep well that night. Oh, and a bear visited in the middle of the night. Didn't hear him, but found plenty of evidence. This was when I used to go to my cousin's house in Round Rock, Arizona, on the Navajo reservation. If you were to look that up on Google Maps, you would notice it is a barren mesa. It is not uncommon for people to report sighting of skinwalkers, and I remember having a few experiences with them. To get to my cousin's house, you would have to drive 20 minutes just to reach her place from the main road. Her trailer was near a canyon. Her house is very isolated, and the nearest neighbor is about 10 minutes by vehicle and 30 by walking. We don't have street lights, and if you wanted to use the bathroom, you have to go to the outhouse, which is a 5-minute walk from the house. If you wanted to go at night, you would need a flashlight, since it is no joke. Pitch black. One night, my cousin, her mother, and I spent the night in their trailer that they let us use. We came to the reservation to return documents to a chapter house, so my cousin and I went for fun. Late at night, as we were watching TV, the windows in the far back room are scratched on. We freaked out because the room door was open and the blinds were up. We ran to that room and tried to close the blinds without looking out because we figured it would be a skinwalker. Her mom was sleeping, so we made sure we locked the doors and tried to ignore the noise all night. We waited till the first light of dawn to go to the bathroom. Even then, we went as a pair and turned on the radio from our phones to keep us sane. The next morning, I remember her mom was making coffee and we were all talking in the living room when one of the plates randomly fell down. Then my cousin noticed that the car doors were open, even though we remember we locked the doors. Nothing seemed to have freaked us out yet, until her mom found out our tires were slashed. Also, the windows looked like they had some kind of claw prints on them. When we told her mom what we experienced that night, she said that it likely a skinwalker, but she said she made sure to put ash on the doorways before night fell. That is what saved us from it coming inside the house. She essentially protected the house by saying a quick protection prayer. It was a freaky experience, and skinwalkers are not to be taken lightly. I've had my fair shares of experiences and hear the stories from my mom and dad on their experiences. Please don't go on the reservations at night alone or leave your belongings out They will steal it and use it to put a curse on you. They can blow a corpse powder on you, which will make you fatally ill and potentially die if you don't go to a medicine man. My family goes camping in Joshua Tree twice a year. This has been going on for at least 60 years. I'm 28, and in that whole time, my family has only ever left early on 2 occasions. The first was when it rained up in the mountains and caused 3 inches of flash flood to wash out our camp at 4 a.m. Second time was much more terrifying, and none of us have an answer as to what actually happened. It's the first night of camping, and 12-year-old me is in the girls' tent with all my girl cousins, and about 6 of my male cousins are 10 feet away from us in another tent. My parents are closer to the road, along with 3 sets of uncles and aunts. All in all, there are about 20 of us. Most of our tents are the kind you can zip open at the top to see the stars, and I always loved doing that because I'm a bad sleeper and it gives me something to look at when everyone goes to sleep. At one point, I close my eyes and I start to fall asleep when a small pebble from the humongous boulder next to our tent falls on top of the tent. I'm used to this because birds or squirrels often knock small debris around when they try to get at our food during the middle of the night. I open my eyes and the first thing I see is someone appears to be standing on top of the boulder, about 15 feet up in the air, looking down into our tents. The person seemed to be wearing tight clothing and was really skinny and oddly shaped. At first, I tell myself that it's one of my male cousins because they had been trying to scare us all night, but the person was moving really weird. Its head was moving back and forth like a cobra, and it kept crouching down on all 4s and crawling down the face of the rock closer to us, then crawling back up and pacing. At one point, it looked up at someone making noise at another campsite, and its eyes gleamed in the moonlight. I'm also entirely sure that it did not have the skull shape of a coyote or a mountain lion. It had a flat face with no snout. So I'm laying in my tent, freaking out and trying to rationalize what I'm looking at. A lot of time goes by, and this thing just continues to watch us and move its body in really strange ways. I think about screaming, but the thing keeps coming down the side of the rock, and I'm afraid it would jump onto our tents and kill us. After some time, I hear a hey. What the heck, hey, what are you doing? It's my uncle. Suddenly, at like 3 a.m., everyone is awake. My female cousins are awake and confused. 2 of my older male cousins jump out of their tent with an axe. For a few seconds, the thing stays completely still, but then my aunt and several of my cousins see it, and they all scream. Someone finds a flashlight, and they turn it on, but the thing jumps off the backside of the rock. A couple of seconds later, it runs, gallops out from behind the rock, past our campsite. My uncle manages to shine a light on it for a second, and I still don't have any idea what I saw, besides the fact that the thing definitely didn't have clothes on, but was naked and had a dark mark on its side that I mistook for spandex. We hear screaming and thrashing from another campsite, and several of the guys in our group go over and investigate. Whatever the thing was, escaped into another campsite and ran into a small 2-person tent. When the rangers got there, it's 4 a.m., and everyone was confused. My uncle and the people at the other tent say that it was a naked person. I definitely don't think it's a person, and thankfully, 2 of my adult male cousins had also spent some time watching it and being absolutely terrified by it. So they agreed with me. We give them all the details we could, and one ranger tells us that it was probably a coyote or mountain lion with mange. The other ranger looks really concerned, and I think he went off into the night to look for it. Either way, it was way too big for a coyote, and I've tracked mountain lions back in college, and know for sure mountain lions do not move like that, nor look like that when they have mange. We all left and went home that night. Either there was a naked crazy person, a monster, or a mountain lion with mange running around, and it had spent at least an hour watching us. No thank you. We stayed in hotels for a couple of years after that, and I've camped there at least 20 more times since then, and I've never heard or seen anything like it since. My house has a wraparound porch, and on the back side of the house, the porch butts right up against the woods. There's no backyard, since literally the thick of the woods grows right up against the porch. One night, I'm sitting on the back porch with my boyfriend, and I hear heavy footsteps, the most heavy sounding steps I have ever heard in my life, like a two-legged elephant is walking onto my porch. The porch is long, and we're sitting at one far end, and the steps are coming from the other far end. I hear the heavy steps slowly coming towards us, and I snap at my boyfriend to get up and turn on the lights. We're both fairly big dudes, but this sound spooks us. I yell to try and scare it off, thinking it was an animal of some kind. But I heard the steps speed up, and it started coming at us faster. It is pitch black, and my boyfriend can't find the lights, so I turn around to run for the porch switches. I hear the steps speed up, and feel a whoosh of wind against my back. I hear the steps slam past me, moving faster towards the other end of the porch, and just before I hit the lights on, I hear two final sounds. The first sounds like it grabbed the railing and pressed off it to jump over the railing, and as it jumps, it lands on the ground, and I hear the huge heavy elephant feet land on the ground. The lights turn on, and I run to look over the railing where it sounded like it landed. It's an 8-foot drop to the ground level, but nothing is there. I want to poop my pants right then and there. I turn around, and my boyfriend is visibly shaken. I've never seen him afraid of anything. We go inside and lock all the doors, and then drink a beer and talk over what just happened. We agreed to not sit out on the porch anymore, the lights off. The funny thing is that we have motion sensing lights on both ends, the porch, not the middle though. And why they never activated is the really weird part.